Hello and welcome to Minter Dialogue episode number 93. This interview is with Anupam Mittal, serial entrepreneur from Mumbai, India, who has been recognized as one of the most influential people in India, as well as in North America, by numerous titles including Business Week and Business Today. As chairman and MD of People Group, Anupam runs some really successful sites, most notably Shaadi, the world's largest matchmaking site. People Group is all about what if, and Anupam is all about exploring opportunities. In this show, we discuss his business and his mindset, some of the keys to his success. We look at the marketing strategies and generally explore the Indian market. A fascinating man on a great adventure. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Minter Dialogue Internet Show, where we discuss brand marketing with a focus on all things digital. I am Minter Dial, author of TheMyndset.com, that's TheMyndset, where branding gets personal. You'll find the show notes on the blog for the upcoming interview. Let's cut to quick. Enjoy the show. Well, Anupam, tell us who you are, what you do, and how do you describe your mindset?
Sure, Minter. So, these are deep questions, but let's see if we can try and answer them.
Sounds
Who
good.
am I is a question I've been asking all my life. I mean, more from what do I do? Basically I'm a founder and CEO of something we call People Group. And it's something I started many decades back. It's been it's been about close to 20 years. For all practical purposes, though, it's only something I started focusing on post the dot-com bust in the U.S. About 2001, 2002 is when I really sort of put my hands into it and said, let's try to make something out of it. And essentially, People Group is, the umbrella sort of organization of three companies. One is called Shaadi.com, which is SHAABI.com. And that's along the lines of Match.com in the West, which most people are familiar with, except that Shaadi is focused more on matchmaking for life partners as opposed to dating. So I think that's a subtle difference, but it manifests into things that are done very differently from what a dating site might be.
Yeah, and it's specific to India.
It's specific to India and South Asian sort of belt of countries. But the primary target remains India, absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have something called Makaan.com, which is a property marketplace. The equivalence of Makaan.com would be a Zillow in the U.S.
Know it well.
And the model is pretty similar, really, is to try to get property brokers and builders to pay us subscription advertising fees, and that's been going pretty well. And finally, we have something called Moj Mobile, which is a little different from the U.S., because we don't see examples of such business in the U.S. that much. It's primarily a applications content company that distributes premium content via subscription on through advertising on operator portals and operator traffic. So there are a few such as them in the U.S., but a lot of them have moved towards free, and I think the app stores are the ones that are really driving revenue in the U.S., which have become destinations. Whereas in India, we find that we are able to build businesses around attracting people through advertising on Google and other operator properties and getting people to subscribe for premium content such as gaming and, edutainment for children and so on.
Cool. All right, what about your mindset?
Yeah, right. The fun part of the question. So I think for me, work has been more a philosophical journey. And it's really about understanding and learning more about myself. And to the extent that I'm having fun and doing stuff that helps me grow, I'm, something that I continue doing. I don't really plan more than 2-3 years at a time. So, if I had to think about what I'd be doing 5 years from now, perhaps nothing of this. Perhaps a lot more of this. I really don't know. Right now we're having fun, enjoying ourselves. And I think the mindset really is to disrupt and try and create something out of nothing. So, for example, we would probably never build an e-commerce store because for us, that's just something that a lot of other people are doing. And at most, we can do it a little more efficiently. For us, it's about creating things that don't exist. And I think that's the mindset that kind of tries to permeate throughout the organization as well. One of the questions that we try to ask, and if you go to our website, which is people-group.com, not very good. We have to redo it. But one of the questions that we like to ask is, what if, right? So what if we could do this? What if things happened a certain way? What if people could find their life partners online? And those are the questions that excite us more than, can we sell our products in a better way?
That's beautiful.
So that's kind of where we seem to be going.
Love it. All right, let's so the way I got to know about you, Anupam, was through Shaadi, because it really struck me as an extraordinary example of a social internet site. And I say social, I want to be careful because I know that you talk about it as a social media application. So talk us about Shaadi and what do you ascribe the success of Shaadi?
Great question, Minter, and, to really be able to do justice to that question, I think I have to give you a bit of a sense of the social sort of situation in India over the last few years. So let me try to put that in a capsule, though. I don't want to take up too much of your camera time. But let's, if we just start out a long time ago, or if you look back a few decades, the way matchmaking happened in India was primarily through traditional sort of middlemen or networks. So you were born in a particular city, you grew up in that city, and you probably died in that city. There wasn't too much domestic migration. There was some international migration, but not a whole lot. And families were very socially connected. So you had what you call pundits or priests who knew a certain network of families, and within that family, somebody would refer somebody, and that's kind of how matches were made. And fast forward to, until about, let's say, 5-7 years back, a lot of pressure started to be created on that system. And I'll explain why. One is that traditional family networks started to break down. The joint family system was starting to break down. Suddenly, 10 years back, we started to see a lot of national migration in this country. So people weren't anymore living and dying in the same city. Today, when I sit across a table with 10 people, 8 out of 10 haven't grown up in this city, right? So that whole system where you actually knew the person and therefore the priest could go find you a match started to break down. The other thing that was starting to happen was there was a lot of Western influence. People wanted to exercise some choice in one of the most important life decisions, which didn't happen earlier. Earlier, somebody suggested a life partner and you simply acquiesced to your parents' designs, and that was the end of that. But now people wanted to exercise some choice, and so that pressure was starting to build up. And in a country where the obsession with marriage is so high, right from the time people are children, parents talk about the children's marriage, which to me is a bit perverse, frankly, but that's just the way it is. And the opposite side of the equation is that the opportunity to meet a life partner is so hard. And that's because of a couple of things that I just explained, which is the traditional networks breaking down, Western influences setting in. Dating is really looked down upon in this country. Everybody has good friends, but nobody really dates, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, I certainly do.
So what do you do, right? Workplace ratios are completely lopsided. There's more men than women everywhere. So the traditional way that you would meet in the West, which is through college or through work, is pretty much taken out of the equation. So a few years back, we kind of looked at this and we said, look, there's really a big problem here, right? And how do we solve that problem? So the internet, right? And it's perfect for taking away geographical and spatial limitations and creating a problem of plenty, really, right? So suddenly you go from having very limited choice to having unbelievable choice. And that, of course, poses its own problems, but that's the kind of problem that's good to have.
Yeah, server overload.
Yeah, exactly. So that really led to the formation of Shaadi.com. And so today it's really, a massive matchmaking platform, which we are socializing as we go along, incorporating people's social profiles and so on for providing more verification, more relevance, more trust, and so on. So I think that's sort of the history and the gist.
All right, so how many people are coming onto Shaadi? What's your sort of traffic these days?
So, we've got about 5 odd million uniques in any given month. We sign up, about 500,000 new users per month. So that's pretty, so that's about 6 million new people every year. So that's pretty good from, if you look at it from the perspective that our users are not persistent. They fall off at some point or the other.
I mean, and if you're successful, that's the design, right?
And so So our purpose is to ensure that our users don't use us for too long. So we're working against ourselves to a certain extent.
Yeah, that's the funny part. The good news is you have quite an open market. And what is the business model in terms of revenues?
Yeah, so it's pretty actually straightforward, right? We don't do any advertising, so let me just preface that answer with that. And we've tried it at various times, but we found that because we are such a focused purpose site, advertising invariably gets in the way of that purpose. And so our model is one of subscription, and it works as kind of a freemium model, if you will. So you're able to sign up for free, you're able to put up your profile for free, you're even able to express interest, what we call, that's our sort of terminology to convey to somebody that you like them for free. It's only when somebody accepts you. So, boy likes girl, sends out an interest to girl, girl says, yes, I'm interested too. Now you have a two-way connection. Once you have a two-way connection, one of them has to pay to take it further. So otherwise, it just remains a connection which you cannot do much with.
Sounds like the question of who has to pay for dinner.
That's right.
Would you be so bold as to say that you're participating in women's emancipation?
Ooh, that's a wonderful question. Wow. So let me look at this in a couple of different ways. Now, let me be the first to admit that I don't know if our business model per se is enabling women's emancipation, because that was never the design of it. That's not how we started out. Having said that, though, does it at some level do that? I think it does. I haven't really given it that much thought, but as I think about it, it perhaps does, because it enables choice for women, and I think to a certain extent choice sometimes leads to emancipation. And so to that extent, perhaps it does. But I think the second part of the answer, which at some point will perhaps meet with the first part in the future, but a couple of years back, we started to work on something called Shaadi Cares. What we realized, Minter, was that we have found ourselves smack in the middle of not just a business, but a big socially relevant topic. Marriage is very, very socially relevant. And what we are doing is not simply a business, and it has to be bigger than that. And so we started to think about that, and we said, look, as wonderful as the institution of marriage might be, and that's something that we're enabling, there are a lot of wrongs in marriage, especially in a country like India. And those wrongs could take the form of dowry. Those wrongs could take the form of child marriage. Those wrongs could take the form of domestic violence. Some of these subjects are around women. Some of them may not be. And so we started something called Shaadi Cares, or Shaadi.org, which we don't have as a domain as yet, but we intend to get it. Mm-hmm. And the idea there was to start working parallelly on trying to right every wrong in marriage. Now that's a lifetime's work, right? It's not something that we are going to be able to address anytime soon. But the first subject that we started off with was dowry, or anti-dowry. And we released a game 2 years back called Angry Brides, very topical at that point because you had the game called Angry Birds. And so it really took off virally. We had over 1 million downloads across the world. The media loved what we were trying to do. And slowly and surely we are now evolving that first initiative about creating awareness about dowry into an organization that's going to help address wrongs in marriage. So what we've now taken up is a documentary film that we're actually co-producing called Love Commandos. And this is an organization in India called Love Commandos, which sort of operates under the radar and helps people who might fall in love, protects them from honor killings, if you know what that is. So there's a lot of community-based issues that can come up in India when there are marriages, especially in the more smaller rural areas which are not in the same community, and these lead to honor killings. So this organization actually goes and protects these people, takes them away to another place, gets them married, helps them set up a life for them, and we are trying to co-produce a documentary around that. So coming back to your question, we did not directly set out to do anything about women's emancipation, to be perfectly honest with you. But as we find ourselves in the middle of what we do, we can't help but get involved in these sort of activities.
That's fantastic. Great to hear. So you don't do any marketing, it's advertising per se on Shaadi. Can you talk us through what are the kinds of things you do to drive the business? What are the levers you use? And maybe because you know so well the Western world, and I know you were BC and lived and worked in the States. What kinds of things do you have to do differently in India to drive the business?
Yeah, I mean, that's that's a great question, I haven't really thought about it very long about what you have to do differently. But as we speak, a few things come to mind. From a customer acquisition standpoint, I don't really think it's that different. So you use the same sort of means, right? So let's first start with boiling down to the 3-4 different drivers of the business. One is customer acquisition. One is customer engagement. So you could look at that as acquisition. You could look at customer engagement as activity, and you could look at payments as activation, right? So the 3 A's, let's look at it from that perspective, right? The fourth A, which is advertising, we've already taken out of the equation. So we've only sort of got these 3 A's, just for conversation's sake as business drivers. So I think when it comes to acquisition, it's not that different than it is in the West. So you use the same mediums. Google is a big one. It's 50-60% of our spend. Social media is becoming very important in the last 6 months, I'd say. Perhaps we're a year behind the West, but follow similar patterns. Affiliate networks, of course, and word of mouth and brand building are also very, very important. Oh, there is one slight difference, I'd say, on the acquisition front, which is a little different from the West. Brand building in India actually is a lot more important than in the West. In the West, culturally, people are more aligned to sit up and figure out things for themselves in terms of what works best and what doesn't. So the classic example that I give is, and I exaggerate a little bit, but in the West, if somebody had to buy a car, they'd probably build a spreadsheet and put in all kinds of data for 3 months before they arrive at a decision on what kind of car to buy. In India, you pick up the phone and call 3 friends, right? And therefore, top-of-mind awareness becomes very important. And so we spend a considerable amount on building a brand that can be trusted, especially in a category that we are in, which is matchmaking, really, and defying everything that was sort of done culturally in this country for so long. I think it's important for us to, create a brand that people can trust.
Well, it just sounds like that social media would play a stronger role if it's really about your friend's advice as opposed to doing it on your own.
I think social media does play a very important role, but we are a relatively young social media country, so most people on social media today have been there only for the last 12 to 18 months, so they're still figuring their way around. The generation before us is frankly not on social media. Very little of it is on social media. So we've got different segments that we need to influence at Shaadi.com. So social media plays a certain role for us, and it's getting bigger with every passing month. But television advertising still forms the crux of brand building in this country, and I think it will for some time. Mm-hmm. It's also the cheapest form of advertising from a per-person reached perspective if you just sort of look at those metrics. Mm-hmm. So I think it's an area that we continue to invest in and will as we move forward.
And sorry, go ahead.
No, go.
I was talking, so you got acquisition, and in terms of activity, what are the kinds of things you have to do to improve engagement?
I think that's an area, an activation, which is people actually paying, that there are two big differences from the West. Engagement is, how should I say? I think people are clearer in the West when they go to, let's say, Match.com or a dating site. There are not as many fence sitters once they've gone to the site. Sure, the site has to perform a certain role and provide you with what you're looking for and do it very intuitively and quickly so they can keep you. But in India, there's a lot more fence sitters. And the reason is a couple of them. One is, as I said earlier, we're relatively new on the internet and social media and using platforms such as these. So people are not really sure what to expect or even how to navigate through to a site. So we have to try to make it as simple as we possibly can.
Mm-hmm.
We have to try to deliver gratification as quickly as we possibly can. And we have to try to keep creating reasons for people to keep coming back. So I think algorithms start to play a very important role in terms of showing you the right matches. Very simple, basic tutorials in terms of how to navigate the site. Very frequent communication starts to play a very important role in terms of trying to get people back. So I think that's kind of how we have to think a little differently and cater really to the lowest common denominator when it comes to engaging people in India.
And I can imagine that being all the more important in an environment which is, quote unquote, sensitive, as in, finding a life partner. Because, you're nervous that people are going to spy on you. What if people find the cookies and all this kind of stuff that might go, and especially for the people who understand the internet, be worried,
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, there is a certain sensitivity, but I don't think that sensitivity has really to do much around cookies and what technology can do. I think it has to do more, let's say, for example, right? So we have people listing themselves, but we also have parents and siblings listing their children or their sisters or brothers to get married. Now, their concern is that what if my neighbor sees my daughter's profile on the site? I don't want my neighbor knowing that, I'm sort of looking for somebody for my daughter, because they might assume I'm desperate, right? And that's not just on the internet. Even offline, when people try to find a match for their daughter or son, they don't really want the community to know they're doing that. Everybody wants to give the perception that people are approaching them and they're the ones who are choosing, as opposed to them sort of chasing. So I think that's a particular sensitive area, and so we have to provide privacy tools and options and provide ability to be able to do things in a very private manner if people so choose to do so.
So just a question, Anupam. In the matchmaking, to what extent are parents involved? Do you have a version that allows for parents to do it on the site, or is it a parentless environment?
No, so there are parents on the site as well. So about 30% of people who use the site in India, or about 35% actually, are parents and siblings, right? Which is the family of the person in question. We don't have a separate version for them in terms of the product, but what we do have is the ability for people to say, look, as I sign up, I may not want to, I don't want parents to be able to get in touch with me. I want to talk only directly to other people who are looking for themselves. So basically, we try to segment the communities based on what people are looking for.
And in the final element of what we're talking about is conversion, or activation. Are there any? What are the keys to success in getting people to turn on? I mean, is it just because you got in front of you the princess you want to marry, or?
Yeah, well, ultimately, this, Minter, better than most, that the key for the internet, for consumer internet to succeed, at the end of the day, you have to be able to provide value, which is what's going to make users pay. The challenge that we see in India is, even after you provide a lot of value, there's penetration of payment options is limited. So credit cards, as you know, of course, debit cards are now pretty prevalent, but credit cards are not that prevalent. Success rate of payment gateways is only about 70%, so you end up losing a third of your transaction. And people change their mind. They might want to buy the product today, and tomorrow they might choose not to. So obviously there's a certain amount of impulse transactions as well, which are the most at risk when you have weak payment mechanisms and payment conversion rates. Mm-hmm. So I think from that sense, what we do differently is we actually have a telesales team that, is able to look at data and say that, look, these people are struggling with paying, or these people attempted to pay and they were not able to. And so we actually place outbound calls to these people and help them through the transaction. Sometimes, or many times, if they don't have a credit card, we are able to send somebody to their home to pick up the payment.
Wow.
And we're able to do that across the country. Many places we do it through our own network, and some places we do a reverse logistics through one of the logistics firms.
So that's a very sophisticated retargeting.
Well, yeah, I guess you could say that.
And I'm sure there's a little bit of discretion when the person where the to collect the payment comes in. They don't have a big Shaadi T-shirt coming in.
You're absolutely right. They don't. So yeah.
What about
those are sensitivities you got to keep in mind?
Yeah. What about the mobile phone? Because obviously mobile is getting heavily penetrated into India, but we're still more probably on the feature phone as opposed to the smartphone. And so, how do you work on that?
I think some of that is just hype, Minter. I mean, if you look at the smartphone activations per month, I think it's close to a couple of million, right? In terms of smartphone activations now in this country. So, the feature phone part versus smartphones, I think that's a dying argument. 2 years from now, it's not even going to matter, right? I mean, that's just a legacy system that you have of people who are not that economic well-off using feature phones from maybe 2-3 years back, and because the primary purpose they feel is just talking, they don't feel the need to change their phone. I mean, that's not even a target that we actually go after. For us, our primary target market is the 300-400 million odd people really at the top and mid-tier of the economy. And, I'd say that when it comes to smartphone penetration in that segment, I'd be surprised if it's not close to 50%.
Well, that's
and
cool.
In the next 2 years, I'd be surprised if it's not 70-80%, especially with, Nokia announcing the new smartphones, a bunch of companies coming out now with sub $100 smartphones, and I think that's only a matter of time.
All right,
I'm not.
That's cool.
So, in fact, Minter, we don't actually develop for feature phones at all. We think it's wasted effort. And so our efforts are around Android and iPhone, and that's really it. As a company, as in the digital space, you have to stay focused and channelize your energies. Otherwise, you could end up, fragmenting your efforts too much. And we figure that, our real value comes from iPhone and Android. Having said that, what we are seeing on these two platforms is just remarkable. So a year back, about 12% of all our interactions were mobile. Today, it's 35%. So in 12 months, 35% of all our interactions are now mobile. In the next 12 months, I expect this will cross 50%, and that's going to be a pretty interesting inflection point.
And so your mobile interface, is it responsive, or is it a specific app? How do you deal with the mobile traffic?
Yeah, so when you have as intensive apps like ours, or intensive usage as ours, I think responsive design doesn't really work well. I think responsive design is good for content sites, for email, and so on. It's not really the best way to go for apps such as ours. So we actually built what we've been doing until now is building hybrid apps, which are HTML and native. We are now moving more towards native apps because the core functionality that you can leverage with native apps is a lot more powerful than what you can do with hybrid or HTML apps. And users' expectations of what apps should feel like, look like, and how they should work has really been increasing progressively. And to address that expectation, we think going completely native is the only way to do it. So, of course, 20% will continue to be HTML for certain reasons, but a lot of it will be native.
And do you have any breakdown as to how the Android world is versus iOS is in?
Yeah, sure. So in terms of and this is not let me try to share some. It's not on top of my mind, so some of it could be off. But in terms of usage, I think it's only about 10-15% of mobile usage. That is iOS versus Android. Mm-hmm. However, what's very interesting is iPhone users are 3 times as engaged as Android users. iPad users are twice as engaged as iPhone users. So that's very, very interesting for us.
So I see a new business for Shaadi, selling iPads.
to the built-in matchmaking application.
Exactly.
Single-purpose iPad.
Love it.
Shaadi.
That's it. I want to switch just a little bit because I know the folks at Zillow, and I'd just like to talk a little bit about Makaan. In many worlds, the property business is a fairly obscure, I don't want to say seedy, but definitely not a easy place to be, especially if you're a buyer. There's very little transparency on pricing, availability, what the commission rates are. Is it the same kind of situation in India?
Well, I think India, there are certain challenges, but they may not be exactly the same. Some are similar, some are different. Let me try to explain. I think when it comes to commission rates and so on, I think that's pretty standard in India. It doesn't go up to 5-6% like it does in the West. I think our commission rates here stay closer to 1 to 1.5 to 2% tops, and more likely it's 1%, and that's pretty well understood across the country. So there's less of a challenge there. I think the challenge in India, which is a little different from the West, is or from Zillow, is the quality of content. So we still have, clients, property brokers, and so on, try to game the system by putting duplicate listings, by misusing the system to a large extent. I think some of it has to do with maturity, and some of it just has to do with cultural issues that we have in India, which is, you've often heard the word jugaad, and people are always finding novel ways around, beating the system. So I think that continues to be there, and because of that, the quality of content is probably not as high as one would like. People are not as deliberate about using the platform, so that's the other issue. And that, again, comes from a bit of a cultural fatalistic sort of, mindset that people have. In the West, I find people are a lot more deliberate when it comes to these platforms to get the best out of them. So while people understand here, for example, that putting photos will get you 3 times the response, there'd still there'd be a lot of inertia about putting the photos, not for any particular reason, but just because. So I think that's the second challenge. And the third challenge, I think, in India is, in the West, people are very happy to put convenience over money, to a certain extent, to a certain degree, of course. So I lived in the U.S. for a long time, and I was only too happy for somebody to take $19 per month from my account, because I didn't have to bother about it. I didn't have to look at a bill. And to the extent that I knew how much that money was and the value that I was getting for it, I was like, yeah, sure, take it out of my account, and it just saves me a lot of hassle. I think culturally the U.S. is very aligned like that. In India, nobody wants to give access to their account. Nobody wants, even if it's completely predictable and completely trusting in terms of how much money will come out of your account and what you're going to get out of it, people do not like the fact that somebody can dip into their account and take money out. And that's probably the reason you see that, 98% of our telecom connection is prepaid and not postpaid, right? So that creates a challenge because one has to constantly go back to the client and try to renew the subscription, which they don't do automatically. So I think there are some idiosyncratic challenges in India that one has to address by coming up with Indian solutions.
Wow. I can just imagine how much of a challenge it is for subscription businesses.
Yes, absolutely.
So when you look at Makaan, maybe as well as Shaadi, what are the things that's driving that? Are you using television ads? You were saying that was the cheapest way to get eyeballs. Is that something that helps drive your notoriety? Because that's more of a business you've had to create. I mean, Shaadi's got a little longer time on the market, as I understand it.
Yeah. So great. Good question. Bringing back the learning from Shaadi in terms of television, are we doing that with Makaan? Now, I think we think television advertising can be very, very important in India. A brand building can be very important, but it has to be seen in the right context. It has to be seen in the stage at which the company is at. Somebody once said that the best way to kill a bad product is good advertising. And so the point that I'm trying to make is advertising as a curve should almost always follow product engagement or user engagement, right? And should never you don't want the product user engagement curve following the advertising curve, because that definitely is sort of the death knell. And we think, the property market in India is still very early, the digital property space. It's a small market right now. It's growing very rapidly. And we think that user engagement is where the focus needs to be for the next 12 to 18 months. Today, we are very proud. I mean, if you look at our traffic at Makaan and compare it to our competition in India, we are, 20% of the leader in terms of traffic. But if you look at our engagement, it's top of the charts, right? And that's the focus that one needs to maintain. It's very easy to get carried away when everybody's advertising and trying to get traffic and say, look, we need to do that as well. But I think that's what separates ultimately the winners, is to keep that disciplined focus on the right things at the right time. We certainly think advertising is going to play a very important role for Makaan. We just don't think it's the right time right now. We think we're 12 months away.
So Shaadi, of course, is now, everybody knows about it. But with Makaan, have you sort of started by, the big cities? How do you roll it out?
Yeah, absolutely. That's kind of what we've done. I think discipline in internet business is very important. It's the easiest thing to get traffic. I could do an ad campaign tomorrow and get hundreds of thousands of users to come to the site. But what you'd see is engagement on an aggregate basis would immediately drop. Yeah. The key thing is when you advertise, your engagement should not drop. And that's what the stage that we're at Shaadi today. We can spend as much as we want on Shaadi, on advertising, and we actually don't see our engagement go down at all. So the reason I'm answering that question again is because you asked me about the cities that how do we roll it out? So besides having the discipline about how to advertise, the other discipline that one needs to maintain is unit economics. In any digital business, especially one which has cost of customer acquisition versus sales. And so what we find is the unit economics for having a field sales force only works best in the top 5 or 6 cities in this country. Beyond that, you're acquiring customers, but it's coming at a huge cost, and you're not really sure how it's going to play out in the future. What we use is tele-sales as a very strong, enabler to get people on board who are beyond these top 5 cities. And that's working very well for us. That's given us central, control, ability to acquire customers at very low cost and then monetize them as we go along.
That's fascinating. I just love that idea of tracking advertising acquisition per se with engagement. And I think that's it's a really crystal clear learning that I've taken away from you, Anupam. All right, I know time is of the essence, so I need to ask you a couple last questions. The first is, and since you're in the land of gurus, who is your role model for the business and your life?
So, let me start by first saying, Winter, as I started out saying, I don't really see my life and my business as two separate things. For me, business has been about life. It's been about learning and evolving. And the day it stops being that, I don't think I'll be in business. My role models and gurus really are different people at different times, who perhaps teach me about things I need to know at that particular time, or people I can look up to and aspire or be inspired for that particular context. So at different times, it's been different people. So, for example, for the longest period, my dad used to be my role model, right? He started out, when he started out, his salary was $2 a month. And he was a struggling salesman, and he went on to build an industry. And so just the fact that somebody could do that was enough of a role model or inspirational enough for me. And so for the longest time, he was my role model. Of course, when we started thinking about disruption and how to go and create things right from scratch that did not exist, who else but Steve Jobs was an incredible role model, right? I mean, I often say, Microsoft disrupted personal computing, and Facebook disrupted, social connections, and Apple disrupted everything.
They disrupted life.
Yeah, they're the epitome of disruption. Yeah. So when you think about disruption, who else but Steve Jobs, right? These days, I wouldn't say my role model, but my inspiration is a spiritual guru who has given or enabled me to find a lot of peace within. And I think when you're very young, it's okay to get up every morning wanting to fight and conquer the world and, being abrasive and building an internet company. But as you start to grow a little older, you realize that you can only carry that burden for so long. And you have to find deeper meaning within your work to be able to wake up every day and come and perform at the optimal level. So I take inspiration from a gentleman called Sadhguru these days, who's part of the Isha Foundation in Coimbatore, and somebody who's given me a lot more meaning that I can derive from my work, and that's what keeps me going.
Solid words. So Anupam, thanks a lot for joining me. I got one last question for you, which is how can anyone track you down or follow you if they are interested in knowing a little bit more about you and what you do?
Yeah, so I think Twitter is probably the perfect platform for that, and it's at Anupam Mittal. It's ANUPAM and MITTAL. So at Anupam Mittal is the easiest way to be in touch. I'm pretty regular, at least once a day, and I'm usually good at getting back. So that's probably the best way.
Well, it's been a pleasure listening to you, Anupam. I think there's some super interesting things for me to learn personally. Like every day we need to learn something. And it's really a thrill to have you on the show.
No, I mirror those sentiments, Minter, because, for me, an interview, especially an interview which poses a lot of challenging questions, almost always leaves me better off. I come out learning a lot more, answering questions that I may not have thought of, and it's very insightful. So thanks for that. And when are we having you in Bombay again?
I can't wait to come back. I can tell you my wife, my children were completely seduced by their experience in Mumbai. So we'll find a reason and we'll come.
Yeah, and when you do this time, we'll do dinner at my place for sure.
That sounds great. Anupam, thanks a lot for being on the show.
Thanks, Minter. Loved it.
Thanks for having listened to this recording of the Minter Dialogue Internet Show. You'll find the show notes on themindset.com, where you can also sign up for my weekly newsletter at /subscribe. If you like the show, please rate it in iTunes, and don't forget to click the handy Facebook like button or to tweet it out. In the meantime, please come join the conversation at The Mindset or catch me on Twitter at MDIAL. Happy trails.